worth of projects forward. So it's not just saying, okay, we've identified a bunch of stuff, we're gonna put this on the shelf, we got $1 million across these communities, they're gonna do some projects that they get grants for, but it is really more about also moving these forward now that they've been identified. So it's not just a minimal amount of grants, but how do we get these things forward? And that's what we're working with the communities to do.
Such a great point, Jeff. Yeah, this is really catalytic funding for us to continue to work with these communities moving forward. I think one great example is the town of Westerly. Out of the municipal resilience workshops and working with the Nature Conservancy, one of the projects that was identified was the need for acceleration of a dredging and eelgrass restoration project that's being funded by the Army Corps, and the town needed match. And so the Infrastructure Bank now is going to be working with the town on providing a loan for the non-federal match component to accelerate that project moving forward. That about a $1 million loan to the town of Westerly is going to unlock just over $5 million of free grant money. So again, we're looking for new ways to identify projects and then be responsive to those projects and really being able to deploy our capital in exciting new ways. In 2020, looking forward, we're kind of structuring our work around a do, support, and inspire model. So on the do model, it's really focused on how do we implement projects. The Infrastructure Bank is driving the investment of these projects to get shovels in the ground and be able to recognize the benefit, understanding that every dollar we spend today is going to be a lot cheaper than any dollar tomorrow. Jeff mentioned the dam removal project in the town of Warren. We've been working on that project with Bristol County Water Authority, the Department of Transportation, Save the Bay, a local nonprofit organization, on dam removal, a road elevation, and a habitat restoration project. Because of our engagement and working directly with the state and the good partnership, we're about 95% of the way in terms of funding that project, and look forward to kicking off the construction early next year. A project that really sort of sat on the shelf for many years because there wasn't really a driver or leadership to be able to push that forward. We're going to be implementing all of our funded MRP programs and projects over the next 9 months to 10 months, and we really picked projects that we knew we could get in the ground quickly. On the support side, the Infrastructure Bank is taking the lead from a state perspective of developing a centralized resource of all funding and financing opportunities for climate resilience projects. I hear all the time, projects pop up and they say, I need money, or money pops up and they say, I need projects. Looking to develop a kind of matrix or centralized location where all of our partners can go for the information needed to implement on those projects, so that we're not calling each other saying, hey, do you have any issues or opportunities? We have a centralized location for where to go. And then finally, Inspire. The Resilient Rhody effort, I think, has catalyzed a lot of interest and excitement around this work. And so we're going to be building a repository of case studies in hopes that others can start to fund and finance projects as well. And the work that we've done can really serve as an inspiration, but also a resource for best practices moving forward. And then finally, at the state level, how does this all roll up? I recognize that our Resilient Rhody strategy is very much connected to the adaptation side, and has been sort of somewhat silent on the mitigation opportunities, although we're looking for ways to mesh the two. But we have a snapshot now or dashboard that's on our www.climatechange.ri.gov website. And that is the central clearinghouse and repository for all of our statewide work. And it's a way that we're tracking and being transparent upon the work that we've been doing across state agencies and connected to our Resilient Rhody effort. So I would encourage everyone to take a look at this that website and also take a look at this snapshot, and we'll be updating this quarterly as we move forward. So thank you so much for the opportunity today. Turn it back over to Brian.
Excellent. Sean and Jeff, thank you for that comprehensive view of the Infrastructure Bank in Rhode Island. We really appreciate it. There are a number of questions coming in, and I just invite the audience, if you have questions, go to your Q&A panel and submit those questions. So the first set of questions really involve kind of the timeline of financing a project. So the first one deals with pre-development. Were these funds used, and I believe it's referring to the 5 projects that you supported with the grants up to $1 million. Were these funds used to cover preliminary design and engineering costs or environmental review? And did they include benefit cost analyses? That's the first kind of life cycle question.
Sean, I'll leave that one to you.
Sure. So we recognize one of the main challenges is when funding comes through, it's often, this is for implementation only. The challenge is that there isn't always a shelf in every municipality that you, or drawer you open and says, here's the projects that I have completely funded and or completely permitted and completely designed, ready to go. So we recognize that, and we really wanted to pick projects that could get in the ground in about a year to a year and a half, but also we're, I would say, halfway through the design process, and we're already going to be permittable. So we allowed for costs to go towards design if it was going to result in the construction of that project, not to start design, but also if they were about halfway through, we allowed for those additional design services and engineering to be included.
Great. So continuing on that life cycle. So now let's step into a little bit on the construction or doing the project. So can you please clarify that your state program allows you to use state dollars for projects on private land if it goes through a nonprofit?
Do you want me to take that one, Jeff, for the MRP,
Yeah,
and then you
sure.
can talk larger? So on the municipal resilience side, there have been a couple of projects. We really want to focus on municipalities in this program, but we recognize that some of these projects don't necessarily know boundaries. And so the nonprofits are looking for ways to really amplify the impacts of that work. I did mention through the Stormwater Project Accelerator, working with nonprofits, we have one example of a project that had some asphalt removal and green infrastructure installed on a bank, on a Citizens Bank parking lot that actually received credit towards the consent decree. Our Department of Transportation would have never been able to do that project coming from a public agency working with a private bank. They couldn't knock on the door, but our partner, the Kentucky River Watershed Council, could. And so while we're providing the financing, the nonprofit is really working on that private land for the benefit of the state.
The other thing with regards to that project, especially in many of these projects, is it's not only managing, reducing stormwater runoff from roads into a river in this case, but it's also providing greenways that connects different parts of the community. And frankly, this isn't a disadvantaged community, connecting the disadvantaged community in a very nice way to the waterfront, which is also being enhanced by the city itself. So these are more than just stormwater transactions. They're also greenways that are enhancing the environment of disadvantaged communities across Rhode Island. And the other thing as well that we need to stress is that on these transactions, especially the stormwater accelerators, this funds that we provide are being recycled. So when we get the money back, we're putting it back into more projects. So again, this isn't, in the case of the Stormwater Accelerator Program, it's not grant funding that we're giving. It is bridge financing to other funding. And then once we get that money back, we're putting it back into projects. So this is being recycled. So I think that's a very important aspect of, some of this money is state sourced. Other is, frankly, operating capital that the Infrastructure Bank has generated over its 30 years worth of operations. And again, everything we do is about recycling capital into new projects and leveraging private sector capital.
Great, thank you for that clarification, Jeff. So, Jeff, this one's for you. This is more of kind of an underwriting question. Can you talk a little bit more about how you look at climate change related risks in terms of your investments that you make?
Sure. So again, a number of the investments we're making are actually hardening existing infrastructure. So that's kind of easy, right? So if it's, a wastewater treatment facility that's sitting right next to the bay that is, protecting itself against sea level rise or storm events, right there, then and there, frankly, that's an investment that is protecting that infrastructure asset. What we're also looking at is, where are these assets located? What is the impact of climate change on these pieces of infrastructure? But also we're increasingly looking at how, as many people are, investors and rating agencies, how is climate change impacting the finances of the municipalities that we're investing in. And what are they doing around protecting what they have that is the economic viability of these communities. So that's a lot of what we're doing. So it's really kind of a multi-layered approach of what is the infrastructure that they're investing in? How resilient is it? Is this investment being made in a way that makes that infrastructure more resilient? And how are those communities responding to the risks of climate change and how they may impact, frankly, the economics of the town? This is where the municipal resilience program is so important, because that is what this is all about, is assisting municipalities in looking at what the risks are to their community across infrastructure, as well as, frankly, economic viability. And that's really an important aspect about this, but that's really how we're looking at it. And of course, it's still early days to really look at a lot of these metrics, but we're trying to build that into what we're trying to do in a way that makes sense and raises awareness of what the risks are.
Great. So digging a little bit more into some of the types of projects. So has the bank funded the purchase of easements on any critical natural lands and farmland? Very specific.
The answer to that question, I believe, is, if I understand the question correctly, because I think there's two aspects to this. Have communities placed easements on properties to expand infrastructure? In that case, no. However, some of our programs certainly do provide for the purchase of land to protect sources of water, to address other issues with regards to sea level rise. But frankly, that's not what we've really been doing. We don't look at enhancing an ability of community to expand infrastructure that isn't related to managing risk around climate resilience. If I understand the question correctly.
I just read it.
Sean, I don't know if you have anything else to add there.
I think the one other, I think you're spot on, Jeff, about the, I don't think we've explicitly done any easements, but one larger initiative in how we're trying to work that I think would be helpful to mention is that, we've traditionally, the first sort of evolution of the infrastructure bank kind of looked at hardening the infrastructure at the bottom of the hill. So looking at the wastewater treatment facility or the pump station, now through our stormwater work and thinking about drinking water source protection, we're thinking about up into the watershed as well, and which has allowed us to think more on the nature-based solutions and natural infrastructure side for flood reduction, water quality benefit, and think again, as I mentioned, in the theme of the nature-based solutions or natural infrastructure, that has allowed us, I think, to think more creatively about the work we do, not just the bottom or the end of the pipe.
Great. So let's dig into that a little bit more, Sean. So can the SRF be used for land conservation and or other nature-based investments, i.e. non-bricks and mortar investments? If so, how?
Well, let's be clear, the SRFs are what is eligible for the SRFs is determined by the EPA, and that's what we have to live by. But certainly there is some flexibility in how we can do that. There are also different ways that we can think about that, and certainly, green infrastructure is an eligible expense for the Clean Water SRF, and protection of water sources is also an eligible expense for drinking water state revolving fund. And again, that's a lot of what we're trying to do, is how do we use these programs to the best effect. We also have some other funds that have been available to us for water pollution abatement. That is where we really are driving a lot of our green infrastructure and natural systems investments, because those have broader criteria than the more narrow state revolving funds.
The other opportunity as well at the SRFs is, you mentioned dam removal and dam repair a few times. In Rhode Island, and maybe you have the same issues in Connecticut, climate resilience also becomes a coastal issue and coastal issue only. increasing storms and sea level rise, like that's just a coastal thing. In the inland communities, it's been harder to engage around climate change. There's been kind of two areas of purchase that we have found. One is on increasing floods kind of through post-industrial cities and towns, and then dam repair has been another. And so the SRFs can be an opportunity there to think about how we deploy capital and work with these municipalities for those sorts of infrastructure repair or removal.
Excellent. All right, so a broad question here. When we think about resiliency, what can we do regionally to share expertise and resources?
I'll take that first and let Sean go. I mean, I think, this is a step in the right direction, really about, how we can engage with our neighbors in a way to take a look at different projects and programs. I think certainly when we look at Narragansett Bay, there's a significant watershed that comes from Massachusetts that impacts Narragansett Bay. How can we be looking at different, certainly we have rivers that we share borders with between Rhode Island and Connecticut. How can we be looking at these things in a more broad basis? And certainly some other organizations that I know Sean's been involved with have looked at more regional coordination across this. I think even what we're going through right now in terms of reopening our economies, from COVID-19 in a way that the respective governors of Rhode Island, Connecticut, and the rest of New England is also a step in the right direction of how we can be thinking about this in a different way.
Yeah, I think that the regionalization is absolutely critical to stretching our resources. I know there's been a lot of work in Connecticut that I've looked to on the implementation side. One example that we've been working with Massachusetts on, our municipal resilience program really came out of their concept for the municipal vulnerability and preparedness program. And so learning and sharing best practices and then being able to adapt them and apply them to your home context, I think is absolutely critical. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut share a lot of the same vulnerabilities and challenges and risks related to climate change. And so finding ways that we can commonly come up with resources and initiatives and really build off that best practice is critical. I've already started making quite a bit of connections with folks in Connecticut. I've been talking with folks at Diehl. I look forward to having that collaboration continue. The work you're doing on the GC3 and our EC4 here in Rhode Island, I think there's a lot of opportunity for sharing. And so I look forward to continuing that collaboration. It's absolutely critical to the success of our region.
And Brian, frankly, the conversations that you and I, as well as our relevant organizations between the Connecticut Green Bank and the Infrastructure Bank around energy has been invaluable in terms of learning lessons from each other and how we can make all of our programs more effective and impactful.
Great. Yeah, sharing information really helps us all accelerate the solutions that we're trying to solve here. So a couple of maybe 2 or 3 more questions, and some of these are really specific. So let me just throw them out there and see how we do. What about getting back to the land part, land conservation? What about the purchase of land for marsh migration corridors? I think this is within the context of when we were talking about the clean water revolving funds, potential eligibility for the types of projects. So the purchase of land for marsh migration corridors.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll address that broadly, and Sean can probably address it a little bit more specifically. Again, these are opportunities that we would love to take a look at to see whether or not we have an opportunity to utilize the different programs we have to finance that type of project. One of the things that needs to be remembered is what we do is we provide finance. Rarely do we provide funding. And so, with the exception of the grants that we provided, the Municipal Resilience Program and some of the other principal forgiveness or grant money that we get through our other programs, we have limited ability to fund projects. Certainly, we take a look at, if those make sense, we'd love to find a way to try to finance those projects, whether it's if it is eligible for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund or our other water pollution abatement funds, we take a look at trying to finance that if it's, if it's a viable project, it makes sense.
All right, one final question before I wrap up here. So with Connecticut in the process of developing its first climate resiliency plan, what recommendation would Rhode Island have for Connecticut?
First, I would eliminate the word plan. One of the things Sean didn't talk about is when we took on the responsibility of developing the strategy called Resilient Rhody, and this really was emphasized by Governor Raimondo, is she didn't want another plan. She wanted an actionable strategy that pulled together, various stakeholders, identified issues, challenges, risks, and more importantly, identified projects that could address those. When we took on that, there were 57 plans across the state of Rhode Island that had been developed, most of which were just sitting on the shelf. They developed a plan, wasn't implemented. And so really it was about developing a strategy to address it and then looking at implementing it. And that'd be the first thing I would change, is just the wording, because again, it also changes the psychology. But Sean, you were more in the weeds on that. Any other advice you'd have?
Yeah, I've got a few scars that I'd be happy to share maybe later. Two things that come to mind immediately that I think have been really lessons learned. The first one is start to define what the role of this is going to be in terms of driving implementation. Much of the work and projects that are identified forward kind of are owned by the municipality. So that municipality-state relationship, I think, is absolutely. What is the role of a state strategy in implementing resilience projects that may be owned by somebody else? So can the state really be a catalyst or an accelerator? And the second one is there's one person in the entire state government in Rhode Island with climate change in their title, and grant-funded position at the Rhode Island Department of Health. And so many people in state government are driven by their job descriptions. And then they're held accountable to their job descriptions by their bosses. And they do the climate change stuff sort of after hours or because they're excited about it. And so it's climate change work around state government because it's everybody's problem, therefore it's nobody's problem. And that's absolutely critical when you look toward ownership and implementation of a strategy. And so we've developed resilience coordinators here in Rhode Island. So now 12 of the key agencies that look at like environment, energy, and transportation related conditions each have now an appointed resilience coordinator, which are really my point people for implementing on the actions that are inside that strategy. So there's accountability and transparency moving forward. So I don't have to call the directors of each of these agencies, hope they answer, and then they have to find the right person. Really coming up with that leadership structure was absolutely key in the implementation of this work.
Great. Jeff, Sean, thank you very much for sharing Resilient Rhody. I love that. It's all action oriented. No plans, no things on the shelf, focus on action. Very, very exciting. Thank you for the comprehensive review of Rhode Island's efforts on resiliency and adaptation. I want to thank all of you viewers for being with us here this afternoon in the Exploring Climate Change Solutions webinar series. Everyone have a good day, be safe and be well. Thank you all.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone.